The sheriff's office in Dusty Hollow was a mess, papers scattered, chairs overturned, and Sheriff Amos Tate standing in the middle, red-faced and shouting orders to deputies who looked ready to bolt, all because of a quiet rancher named Eli Carson, who'd done something nobody saw coming. But to understand why the sheriff's office was in chaos, you have to go back a few days, to a dusty morning on Eli's ranch just outside town. Eli was out by the barn, mending a gate that his horse had kicked through again. The sun was already blistering, and he was sweating through his shirt, muttering about stubborn animals. He was 42, lean from years of hard work, with hands calloused enough to tell you he'd been at this life a while. His ranch wasn't much, couple dozen acres, some cattle, a few horses, but it was his. That morning, he noticed something off. A figure was limping across his field, moving slow, like they were hurt. Most folks around Dusty Hollow would have grabbed a shotgun first and asked questions later. Strangers didn't just wander onto private land out here. But Eli squinted, wiped his brow, and set down his hammer. Something about the way the figure moved tugged at him. If you're hearing this story, maybe on your television or phone, take a second to hit that like or share button. It's a small thing, but it helps keep stories like this out there, connecting us through the real stuff that matters. The figure was a woman, young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair tangled and matted with dirt. She wore a faded dress, torn at the hem, and one shoe was missing, her foot bloody from walking. Eli approached slow, hands out to show he meant no harm. Up close, he recognized her Rosa, the maid who worked for the Hendersons, the wealthy family in town who owned half of Dusty Hollow's businesses. Rosa's eyes were wide, panicked, like a cornered animal. She was muttering in Spanish, too fast for Eli to catch much, but he heard ayuda and por favor. Help. Please. Her ankle was swollen, twisted bad, and she could barely stand. Eli didn't think twice. He scooped her up, light as she was, and carried her to his small house. Inside, he set her on the couch, propping her foot on a cushion. Rosa flinched at every sound, her eyes darting to the windows. Eli grabbed a basin of water, a cloth, and some bandages from his kit. He wasn't a doctor, but he'd patched up enough injured animals to know the basics. As he cleaned her foot, Rosa started talking, her voice shaky. She'd been running from the Henderson house. Something bad happened there, she said, but her words were jumbled, fear, not language, making it hard to follow. Eli nodded, kept his voice low, and told her she was safe now. He wasn't sure she believed him. Rosa sipped water while Eli heated some beans and cornbread. The smell of food seemed to calm her a bit. She ate slowly, wincing when she moved her ankle. Eli asked what happened, keeping his tone gentle, like he was coaxing a spooked horse. Rosa said she'd seen something at the Hendersons, something she wasn't supposed to. Papers, she said, and money. Lots of money. And Mr. Henderson yelling, not at her, but at someone else. Then she'd tripped, running down the back stairs, twisted her ankle, and kept going anyway. She didn't know where else to go, so she'd headed toward Eli's ranch. The only place she'd ever heard was quiet, safe. As Rosa spoke, a shadow passed by the window, a quick blur, gone before Eli could be sure. His heart skipped, but he kept his face calm, not wanting to scare her more. He stepped outside, scanning the field. Nothing but swaying grass, and the distant low of his cattle. Still, his neck prickled. Someone was watching. He locked the door, something he rarely did, and slid a chair under the knob for good measure. Rosa noticed, her hands tightening on the blanket he'd given her. She whispered that Henderson had men who followed people, men who didn't ask questions. Eli nodded, jaw tight, and told her to rest. He'd keep watch. No one was getting through that door tonight. Eli sat back, processing. The Hendersons were powerful, owned the general store, the saloon, even part of the bank. If Rosa saw something they didn't want out, she was in trouble. And now, so was he. He glanced out the window, half expecting to see men on horseback coming for her. Nothing yet, but his gut told him it was coming. Rosa clutched his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She begged him not to tell anyone she was here. Not yet. Eli nodded, but his mind was racing. Hiding her could mean crossing the most powerful family in town. But sending her back, hurt and scared, that wasn't who he was. By afternoon, word must have spread. Eli's nearest neighbor, Tom Brody, rode up, his face grim. Tom was a gossip, always sticking his nose in everyone's business. He said the Hendersons were tearing through town, asking if anyone had seen Rosa. They weren't calling it a crime yet, but they were offering a reward, $50, enough to turn heads in Dusty Hollow. Tom eyed Eli's house like he could see through the walls. Eli shrugged, said he hadn't seen anyone, and sent Tom on his way. But Tom's visit meant time was short. Eli went back inside, where Rosa was trying to stand, wincing with every step. He told her to sit, that he'd figure something out. But what? He couldn't keep her hidden forever. That evening, a sharp knock startled them both. Eli peered through the curtain and saw Widow Jenkins, the town's busybody, standing on his porch with a basket of apples. She called out, saying she'd heard about the missing maid and just wanted to check on him. Eli opened the door a crack, keeping his body in the way. Widow Jenkins craned her neck, trying to see inside, her smile too tight. She mentioned the reward, said folks were talking, and maybe Eli had seen something he didn't want to admit. Eli thanked her for the apples, said he was fine, and shut the door firm. Rosa, hidden behind the couch, was holding her breath. Widow Jenkins lingered on the porch a moment too long before leaving. Eli realized the town was closing in, and not everyone was asking out of kindness. That night, Eli barely slept. He sat by the window, his old rifle across his lap, listening for hoofbeats. Rosa dozed on the couch, her breathing uneven. Around midnight, he heard it riders. Not just one or two, but a group. He peered out and saw 4 men, lanterns swinging, their voices sharp. One was Sheriff Amos Tate, his badge glinting in the light. Another was Daniel Henderson himself, his fancy coat out of place in the dust. Eli's stomach dropped. They weren't here for a friendly chat. He shook Rosa awake, told her to hide in the root cellar under the kitchen. She limped down the steps, her eyes pleading for him to be careful. Sheriff Tate banged on the door, shouting for Eli to come out. Eli took a deep breath, set his rifle down, he wasn't about to start a shootout, and opened the road. Tate was all business, saying Rosa was missing, and the Hendersons thought she'd stolen something valuable. Papers, maybe, or cash. Daniel Henderson stepped forward, his voice smooth but cold, saying Rosa was unstable, that she'd run off after breaking things in his house. Eli kept his face neutral, said he hadn't seen her. Tate searched the house anyway, poking through cabinets and under the bed. They didn't find the cellar trapdoor, hidden under a rug. But Daniel's eyes lingered on Eli, like he knew something was off. As the men rode away, Eli heard a faint clatter from the barn. He grabbed his lantern and crept out, heart pounding. Inside, he found one of his horses loose, its stall door swinging open. Someone had been here, tampering. A scrap of cloth, torn from a man's shirt, was caught on a nail blue, like the kind Deputy Carl wore. Eli's blood ran cold. They weren't just searching, they were setting him up, making it look like he'd been hiding something all along. He stuffed the cloth in his pocket and double-checked the barn, locking it tight. Back inside, he told Rosa they had to move soon. Her eyes widened, but she nodded, trusting him even as fear tightened her face. After they left, Eli helped Rosa out of the cellar. She was shaking, whispering that Henderson was lying. She hadn't stolen anything. She'd seen papers in his study, ledgers with numbers that didn't add up, names of people who'd lost their land to the Hendersons. She thought they were cheating folks, foreclosing on loans that weren't due. Eli didn't know much about bookkeeping, but he knew enough to realize Rosa had stumbled onto something big enough to make her a target. He told her to rest, that he'd take her to someone he trusted in the morning, a doctor in the next town who wouldn't ask questions. Morning brought trouble faster than Eli expected. He was hitching his wagon when he saw dust rising down the road. More riders, this time with Deputy Carl Watts leading them. Carl was young, eager to please the Hendersons, and not too bright. He shouted that they had proof Rosa was here. Tom Brody had seen her limping toward Eli's land yesterday. Eli cursed under his breath. Tom must have gone straight to the sheriff after leaving. Carl demanded to search again, but Eli stalled, saying he needed to tend his horses first. He needed time to think. Rosa, hidden in the barn now, was listening from behind a hay bale. Before Carl could push past, a shout came from the road. It was Mary, the saloon keeper's daughter, riding hard on a borrowed horse. She was out of breath, her face flushed, saying she'd overheard Henderson's men at the saloon last night, bragging about teaching Eli a lesson. They'd planned to plant stolen goods in his barn silverware, jewelry to frame him as Rosa's accomplice. Mary had slipped out to warn him, risking her own neck. Eli's jaw clenched as he thanked her, his mind racing. He told Carl the search could wait, that he'd heard about a setup. Carl scoffed but hesitated, glancing at his men. Mary's warning had shaken him. Eli used the moment to send them off, promising to come to town later. Mary stayed, her hands trembling as she handed Eli a small knife for protection. Eli's mind raced. He could hand Rosa over, claim he'd just found her, and wash his hands of it. But the way Henderson had lied last night, the way his men were circling like vultures, told Eli that Rosa wouldn't be safe if she went back. He made a snap decision. He told Carl he'd seen Rosa, but she'd left at dawn, heading west toward the river. It was a lie, but it bought time. Carl and his men rode off to check, but Eli knew they'd be back when they found nothing. He hitched the wagon faster, helped Rosa climb in, and covered her with a blanket. They had to get to that doctor before the Hendersons caught up. The road to the next town was rough, and every bump made Rosa wince. Eli kept the horses moving steady, glancing over his shoulder for dust clouds. Rosa whispered more about what she'd seen: ledgers with fake debts, names of families who'd been driven off their land. She'd worked for the Hendersons for 2 years, quiet and unnoticed, until she'd overheard Daniel talking to a man from the bank. They were planning to foreclose on 6 ranches, including Eli's one. That hit him hard. His ranch was all he had left after his wife passed 5 years ago. He gripped the reins tighter, jaw set. Halfway there, a wheel hit a rut, and the wagon lurched. Rosa gasped, clutching the blanket. Eli stopped to check, and that's when he saw it, a fresh hoofprint in the mud, too clean to be old. Someone was trailing them, close. He scanned the horizon, spotting a glint of metal in the brush. A rider, maybe 2, keeping their distance. Eli's heart thudded, but he kept his voice steady, telling Rosa to stay low. He flicked the reins, pushing the horses faster, the wagon rattling like it might fall apart. The glint disappeared, but Eli knew they weren't alone. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching, they were waiting for the right moment. He muttered a prayer, something he hadn't done in years. They reached the doctor's house by noon. Dr. Ellis was an old friend, a gruff man who didn't care for the Hendersons or their money. He took one look at Rosa's ankle, shook his head, and said it was a bad sprain, maybe a fracture. He splinted it, gave her something for the pain, and told Eli to keep her off her feet. Eli explained everything: Rosa's story, the Hendersons, the sheriff's visit. Ellis listened, his face darkening. He said the Hendersons had been bullying folks for years, but nobody could prove it. Those ledgers, if Rosa was right, could change everything. But getting them would mean going back to the Henderson house. Risky, maybe impossible. As Ellis worked, a boy burst through the door: Timmy, the blacksmith's son from town, panting and wide-eyed. He'd run all the way, dodging Henderson's men, to deliver a message. The Hendersons had sent telegrams to nearby towns, claiming Rosa was dangerous, maybe even armed. They'd upped the reward to $100, and now bounty hunters were sniffing around. Timmy's father had sent him to warn Eli, saying the town was splitting. Some folks believed Rosa, others wanted the money. Eli thanked the boy, slipping him a coin, and sent him back with a message to stay quiet. Rosa's face paled, her hands twisting the blanket. Eli realized the net was tightening, and trust was running thin. Eli and Rosa stayed at Ellis's place that night, hidden in a back room. Rosa was calmer now, but still scared. She kept saying she didn't want Eli to get hurt because of her. He waved it off, said he was already in deep. Truth was, he couldn't walk away. Not after hearing his ranch was on the Hendersons' list. Not after seeing Rosa's fear. He wasn't a hero, just a guy who couldn't stand bullies. Ellis offered to ride to Dusty Hollow, see if he could get word to a judge in the county seat about the ledgers. But judges moved slow, and the Hendersons had deep pockets. Eli wasn't sure who they could trust. The next morning, trouble found them again. Deputy Carl and 3 men rode up to Ellis's house, this time with Daniel Henderson himself. They weren't asking politely anymore. Carl said they'd tracked the wagon's ruts from Eli's ranch. Henderson accused Eli of hiding a thief, said he'd have him arrested for aiding a fugitive. Eli stood on Ellis's porch, arms crossed, and said Rosa wasn't a thief, she was a witness. That stopped Henderson cold. His eyes narrowed, and for a second, Eli saw real fear in the man's face. But Henderson recovered fast, telling Carl to arrest Eli for obstruction. Ellis stepped in, saying he'd vouch for Eli, that Rosa was injured and needed care. The standoff lasted a tense minute before Carl backed down, saying they'd be back with a warrant. Before they left, Henderson leaned close to Eli, his voice low so only he could hear. He said Eli's ranch would be ashes by week's end, whether they found Rosa or not. The threat wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like a blade pressed to Eli's throat. Eli didn't flinch, just stared back until Henderson turned away. Rosa, watching from the window, saw it all, her lips pressed tight. She limped to Eli after they left, saying she'd go back to town herself, turn herself in to stop this. Eli shook his head, said that wasn't happening, but her words planted a seed of doubt. Could he protect her and his ranch both? He pushed it down, focusing on the next step. Eli knew they couldn't stay. He and Rosa had to move, but her ankle made it tough. Ellis gave them his old cart and a mule, saying it was slower but less likely to draw attention. Eli helped Rosa into the cart, and they headed for a small settlement 20 miles north, where Eli had a cousin who might hide them. The ride was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Rosa said she felt guilty for dragging Eli into this. He shook his head, said he'd made his choice, but inside, he was wondering how long they could keep running. The Hendersons had money, men, and the sheriff in their pocket. Halfway to the settlement, they hit a problem. The cart's wheel cracked on a rock, stranding them in the middle of nowhere. Eli cursed, kicking the broken wheel. Rosa tried to help, but her ankle gave out, and she sank to the ground, tears in her eyes. For the first time, Eli felt the weight of it all: his ranch, Rosa's safety, the Hendersons' power. He sat next to her, the sun beating down, and asked why she'd kept running instead of going to the sheriff. She looked at him, eyes hard, and said Sheriff Tate was at the Henderson house the night she ran. He was part of it. That hit Eli like a punch. The whole system was rotten. A low whistle broke the silence. Eli spun, hand on the knife Mary had given him. It was Old Man Tucker, a drifter who roamed these parts, leading a mule with a cart of his own. Tucker's weathered face cracked into a grin, saying he'd seen their trouble from the ridge. Without asking, he started unhitching his mule to tow their cart. Rosa watched, wary, but Tucker hummed a tune, ignoring their tension. He said he'd crossed the Hendersons once, years ago, and knew they're kind men who'd burn a town to keep their secrets. Eli didn't trust easily, but Tucker's steady hands and calm eyes won him over. By nightfall, they were moving again, Tucker leading the way to a hidden trail he swore no bounty hunter knew. They were stuck until dusk, when a farmer passing by offered to tow the cart to his barn for repairs. The farmer, an older man named Amos, didn't ask too many questions, but his wife, Clara, took one look at Rosa and insisted on feeding them. Over dinner, Eli told them enough to get help but not enough to put them in danger. Clara bandaged Rosa's ankle better, and Amos fixed the wheel by morning. They were back on the road, but Eli's gut was twisting. He knew the Hendersons wouldn't stop, and now, with the sheriff involved, things were worse than he'd thought. When they reached the settlement, Eli's cousin, Matt, was waiting. Matt was a blacksmith, broad-shouldered and blunt, but loyal. He took them in, no questions asked, and hid them in his attic. Rosa was running a fever now, her ankle infected despite the splint. Matt's wife, Sarah, knew some nursing and got to work cleaning the wound. Eli paced, feeling useless. Matt pulled him aside, said word was spreading the Hendersons had doubled the reward, and now they were calling Rosa a dangerous fugitive. Eli told Matt everything, from the ledgers to the sheriff's involvement. Matt whistled low, said they needed proof to take down the Hendersons. Without those ledgers, it was Rosa's word against theirs. That night, a crowd gathered outside Matt's house. Townsfolk, some curious, some angry, drawn by the reward. A man Eli didn't know, with a scar across his cheek, shouted that harboring Rosa was betraying Dusty Hollow. Matt stepped out, hammer in hand, and told them to scatter. Most did, but Scarface lingered, spitting in the dirt before leaving. Sarah whispered to Eli that the man was a hired gun, known for doing Henderson's dirty work. Rosa overheard, her feverish eyes meeting Eli's. She grabbed his hand, her voice weak but fierce, saying she'd face them if it meant saving his family. Eli shook his head, but the crowd's shouts echoed in his mind. The town wasn't just watching, it was choosing sides. That night, Eli made a decision. He couldn't keep running, and Rosa couldn't either. He told Matt he was going back to Dusty Hollow to get those ledgers. Matt tried to talk him out of it, said it was suicide. Rosa overheard and grabbed Eli's arm, begging him not to go. But Eli was done hiding. He told her to stay with Matt and Sarah, to get better. He'd be back with the ledgers or not at all. Before dawn, He saddled Matt's fastest horse and rode back, his heart pounding but his mind clear. The Henderson house was quiet when Eli got there, just past midnight. He'd scouted it once, years ago, when delivering cattle. He knew the back entrance, where Rosa had run from. Slipping through the shadows, he found the study window unlatched, sloppy, but lucky. Inside, the house was dark, the air heavy with cigar smoke and whiskey. He found the study, its desk piled with papers. He lit a small candle, keeping it low, and started searching. Ledgers, just like Rosa said, with names, dates, and numbers that didn't add up. He stuffed 2 of them under his shirt, his hands shaking. That's when he heard boots on the stairs. Daniel Henderson's voice cut through the dark, calm but deadly. He was holding a pistol, standing in the doorway. He didn't call for help, just stared at Eli, like he'd expected this. Henderson said Eli was a fool, that those ledgers wouldn't see a courtroom. Too many people owed him, including the sheriff. Eli stood his ground, said the truth was coming out, one way or another. Henderson laughed, raised the gun, and then froze. A noise outside, horses, voices. Eli's heart leapt. Had Matt followed him? But no, it was Sheriff Tate and his men, surrounding the house. Henderson cursed, realizing he'd been caught with Eli in his study. He lowered the gun, told Eli to leave the ledgers and go. Eli refused, backing toward the window. A crash came from downstairs, glass shattering, boots stomping. It wasn't Tate's men. A woman's voice shouted, sharp and fearless. It was Mary, the saloon keeper's daughter, with 2 ranchers from the edge of town. They'd followed Eli, knowing he'd need backup. Mary held a shotgun, her eyes blazing, saying she wasn't letting Henderson ruin another life. The ranchers blocked the door, their faces hard with years of resentment against the Hendersons' greed. Henderson's pistol wavered, his confidence cracking. Eli seized the moment, grabbing the ledgers and bolting for the window. Mary covered him, her shotgun steady, as the ranchers pushed Henderson back. They were out before Tate's men could react, disappearing into the night. What happened next was chaos. Tate's men burst in, not to save Eli, but to cover Henderson's tracks. They grabbed the ledgers, shoved Eli to the floor, and started shouting about a break-in. But Eli had one last card. He'd slipped a page from the ledger into his boot before Henderson caught him. As Tate's men dragged him to the sheriff's office, Eli kept quiet, waiting for his moment. The office was astorm, deputies yelling, Henderson demanding Eli's arrest, Tate trying to keep control. Eli stayed calm, even as they locked him in a cell. He knew that page in his boot was his only shot. Morning brought a surprise. Dr. Ellis rode into town with a judge from the county seat, a man the Hendersons didn't own. Ellis had gotten word to him about Rosa's story, and the judge was there to investigate. Eli handed over the ledger page, hidden in his boot, and told the judge everything: Rosa's escape, the fake debts, the sheriff's involvement. The judge listened, his face unreadable. He ordered Tate to bring Rosa to town, under protection. Tate hesitated, but the judge's authority was clear. By noon, Rosa was there, her ankle still bandaged but her voice steady as she told her story. The ledger page backed her up: names, dates, proof of fraud. As Rosa spoke, a murmur spread through the crowd outside the sheriff's office. Townsfolk had gathered, drawn by rumors of the judge's arrival. Old man Tucker was there, leaning on his cane, his eyes sharp. He stepped forward, holding up a tattered letter he'd kept for years, a loan agreement from Henderson that had cost him his land. Others joined in, pulling out their own papers, their voices rising. The judge's face hardened as he realized the scale of the fraud. Rosa's testimony wasn't just her story, it was the spark that lit the town's anger. Henderson, standing in cuffs, looked smaller, his power crumbling as neighbors he'd cheated glared at him. The sheriff's office turned upside down. Tate was suspended, pending investigation. Henderson was arrested, his smooth talk useless against hard evidence. The town buzzed, people whispering about the quiet rancher who'd taken on the most powerful man in Dusty Hollow. Rosa stayed with Eli's cousin until her ankle healed, then took a job at the schoolhouse, teaching kids to read. Eli went back to his ranch, quieter than ever, but with a new reputation. Folks started calling him the man who didn't back down. His ranch was safe, at least for now, and he slept a little easier knowing he'd done right by Rosa. If you're still with me, maybe take a moment to hit that share or like button. It's a small way to spread a story about standing up, even when it's hard, and it means the world to keep these stories alive.